Welcome to the Live Like an Acrobat podcast, where we explore circus arts, circ fitness, and acrobatic gymnastics competitiveness. I'm your host, Shenea Stiletto, two-time world champion hand balancer, USA Gymnastics Hall of Famer, and circus artist. I want to start with offering you the opportunity to explore extended conversations and content of each episode of Live Like an Acrobat on the circuspreneur.blog.com. Circus is performance and preneur is business-minded logic. Also, please be sure to check out aerialfitbodies.com, where I offer weekly Sunday handstand classes as well as one-on-one private handstand training. I want to dedicate this episode of Live Like an Acrobat to the lives of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Sandra Bland, because Black Lives Matter. On this episode of Live Like an Acrobat, I want to share my experiences with racism within the circus world. I am not only inspired to do so by the current protests raging all over America in an effort to bring justice for the lives of these precious loves lost, but also because recently I was honored by my former acrobatic gymnastics partner, Arthur Davis, as a prominent performer of color. It was with this recognition and the current state of unrest that I felt compelled to share how being a Black circus performer and acrobatic gymnast my entire life has looked through my eyes. Realizing that when Arthur Davis recognized me, I could still think of so few other Black circus artists that I could pay tribute to. And that's because, sadly, there are so few of us. We are granted space and access in many ways only one or two at a time, so our intersecting does not happen very often. I'm usually the only Black performer in the show I'm in, and the only Black person in the entire city or town where I'm performing or would be competing when I was younger. Most times I'm the first Black person anyone in the show has had a first-hand experience with in their entire lives. Yes, it is that deep. It is in 2020 still that powerful, and yet sad to realize that diversity has continued to only slowly trickle throughout the world, and that certain spaces present us with a small percentage of representation. I'm so used to being the only Black person around that it doesn't bother me. It's so normal. But to say that I don't have acute experiences of racism, either knowingly or unknowingly, would be quite naive to say, no matter how well received and loved I feel I am in the world, as I have traveled for most of my life outside of America. It's partly being Black American and partly just being Black that drives the narrative when I enter into a new space. I'm usually asked, after 16 years of circus performing, if this contract is my first in Europe or my first trip out of America in my life. This has become the norm, and I'm accustomed to explaining myself, however efforting it may feel to do so. I know that many questions come out of curiosity and stereotypes. I've been raised and truly and deeply loved by others who are not Black since I was very little. I've felt nurtured and supported and loved by those who never once made who I am about being Black, and I'm so grateful for that. It surely brought me into the free-spirited human being that I am today. But as much as they did their loving, I, as a Black person, as a Black woman, have never been fully shielded by what their love could not protect against. The deep-seated racism that runs through America and around the globe. I've never felt threatened by the world because the world raised me. I am biracial, and so I'm used to people asking if I'm adopted because to them I don't look anything like my mother. And even still being questioned after I state that she is my biological mother, that it's still hard for them to believe. So I understand the feeling of people questioning what you look like in terms of your connection to those who you literally came from in a bodily form. So for me, from a young age, I've had to create a very strong sense of identity. With that said, you never get used to racism. Sandra Bland's case of injustice disturbed me deeply from the moment I heard it explained in full detail by author of Talking with Strangers, Malcolm Gladwell. He puts forth the theory about how too often we make dangerous assumptions about people we don't know. Here is an excerpt of Malcolm Gladwell, interviewed by Oprah, retelling the encounter that led to the shocking death of Sandra Bland. There was something about how senseless and heartbreaking her case was. Here's a woman who is 28 years old, who's come to start her life anew in a lovely little town in the middle of rural Texas. And this happened after Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Philando Castillo, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, and then Sandra Bland. And she's a very politically aware person. She had some difficulties in Chicago. She's moving. She's starting her life over. She's literally arrived in Texas that day. She has a job interview. She gets this job. She's leaving the college campus, and a police officer looks at her and makes a judgment. And his judgment is, I think there's something funny about her. And he trumps up an excuse to pull her over, and they have an interaction. And what's heartbreaking is that we have the dash cam, which records the entire interaction. And it starts out friendly. He asks her if she's okay and why are you here? And we think it's fine until he asks her to put out her cigarette. And she says, why do I have to put out my cigarette? And by the way, she hasn't done anything. The weird thing is that he'd seen her and pulled up super fast behind her. So what does she do? Well, she moves over to get out of the way, of course, which is what you do when a cop pulls up fast. You do what you are told to do. But she doesn't use her turning signal because she's getting out of the way. So what does he do? He says, ma'am, you didn't use your turning signal. And she's like, what did I do? I didn't use my turning sign because I was getting out of the way for you. And so she's irritated, as she should be. And she's lit a cigarette. And then everything goes sideways. And they have this argument that escalates. And he ends up hitting her, dragging her out of the car, and handcuffing her and putting her in jail, where she allegedly committed suicide 2 days later. And the question is, how is it that something that trivial can go so dramatically awry in broad daylight in one of the most civilized countries in the world? Being a two-time world champion and a cirque performer has gotten me through many doors, and as a black person, as a black woman, it's shielded me and provided me a status that has, I know, softened the blow to what it is being a person of color for others when they engage with me. I have been in many spaces where the conversation and the interaction and the energy projected towards me has shifted considerably out of negativity to a positive one once I state my profession, my titles. I'm initially met at times with uninterest, with complete uninterest, with being ignored, with those not very much interested in what I have to say when I come into a room. My stature, my physique is something as well, because it is unique and not the stereotypical, as I've been told many times, way that a black person or a black woman is supposed to look or does look like, has garnered me a certain level of status and respect when I come into a space and when I inhabit a room. Sadly to say, these superficial things, these things about us that mean so little, but that means so much. And I recognize that without those titles, there would be a space for me to feel that would be even more difficult to do so, were I not afforded at least the fact that I have titles that mean something in the world. We know that we're not our titles, that what we've done, that how we succeed has nothing to do with the value of who we are. But it does take those titles that much to get into a space where people ask you again, oh, what did you say before? To restate that opinion that hasn't changed from 5 seconds ago, but that all of a sudden is very interesting to them. Or that now you're very interesting to them. And every black person, every black woman, they know if they are in this world, if they're a circus artist, if they're a black person of a certain status or holds a certain credential that people deem respectable, that if you fall into those certain paradigms, that you are a black person to be heard, that you are a black person to be treated with some level of interest, something special, overly special, but something special, has to be so dynamic and so interesting. You don't get used to being told that you are aggressive or challenging, or that you have a certain kind of attitude when you speak, when you disagree with something that is obviously disrespectful and unprofessional and putting you at danger and putting you in risk, when you've not at all raised your voice or said anything in a tone that would suggest aggression or disappointment or negativity at all. When you are told and it's suggested that because you are not allowing others to do your hair a certain way, because your hair can't use certain products, that your hair cannot maintain certain looks day in and day out, that you are difficult for acknowledging that fact and for wanting to find a different solution, due to the fact that you have a different texture of hair and that it needs special care and not the care that the company is providing. Being made to feel like you're difficult when you suggest other methods to take care of your hair on set or in a show. And being told that that's how they do it for all the other girls, and so why can't you just do it the way that all the other girls do it? That it's so much easier doing the other girl's hair. You don't get used to people questioning you if you live in a certain building or a security guard following you around the store in other countries. Or when you are costume shopping for your circus act, store clerks constantly asking if you are finished looking so that you can leave, only to ask you if you want a private viewing once you mention which popular circus show you are working with in the country. You don't get used to hearing the N-word backstage, only to be told that they don't think that way about you because you are a different kind. Or when companies request European-looking only performers for contracts and events, leaving you out of a considerable amount of offers and work. Or when you are told by artistic directors that you are not really the right look for the job you've been booked for, always wondering if they know you've heard those code words throughout your career. You don't get used to commercial agents questioning you if you are really biracial because you are darker than they expect a biracial person to be, someone with mixed European heritage. Or when a client that has hired you tells you that you are so lucky you are not that dark as a compliment. You don't get used to environments constantly questioning how you got your role and position, always wanting a list of credentials and background to prove how you got your job, and curious still how those accomplishments came to be. Or when you land a historic role in a famous company, but the company has no interest in recognizing that you are the first Black American to do the role and how precious that is to you. Or when you grow up in a sport where there are so few athletes that look like you. Or when a company doesn't have costume fabric in your skin tone because they've never had to before, and you perform slightly insecure with others commenting about how the aesthetic is off. Or when costume designers tell you that they cannot offer you something that matches because they are not used to performers like you. Or cruel jokes suggesting using chocolate candies to do your makeup for a show when you can't find your color in any store. Or lighting technicians not knowing how to light you and audiences telling you that they could not see you on the stage, yet those in power refusing to light your darker skin differently. Or being accused of lightening your skin in promotional photos, even though you are simply using professional lights for the photo shoot and others not understanding how that affects darker skin. Or when relationships that are healthy and flourishing die out of the blue due to cultural differences, leaving you confused and burdened. Or when you are told at a young age that you are overtly sexual while competing in acrobatic gymnastics. Or that your performance costumes are too sexy, only to arrive on the contract and perform with other performers who are not Black, who are wearing less than what you plan to wear and performing very sexily, but told that they are elegant when you are called vulgar. Or when you're told by directors that you are not sexy. When you realize that your non-Black counterparts have had the same contract for 2 years, but you have worked more than 10, while being told from the beginning of potential long-term opportunities that they don't keep the non-European looking performers that long. Or when you have great ideas that are ignored, only to turn around and see others use those ideas and receive considerable acclaim. Or not having your makeup adapted properly for your skin tone by those in charge, and then having the makeup used as a critique by an artistic director of why your performance hasn't been very good or up to par. Or being denied to get on a flight because you have the look of others carrying a deadly disease. Having bleaching cream applied to your face without your consent in a store by a stranger in a foreign land. And when you are trying to have a self-care spa day, being told that you should really consider brightening your skin, and are you sure you don't want bleaching cream applied so you can look so much better? Being reminded that your options are limited in many spheres for how others see you. Others being surprised that your work came from you, even though they constantly ask whose idea it was year after year, and focusing on that fact instead of listening to how you actually created it. Being offered much less money in comparison to others when you find out how low your bid was started. Being the only performer that looks like you within any show and having bets placed on you by male performers about who can get with you first because you are the exotic girl. Or having directors refuse to acknowledge your Blackness and speak to you in Spanish the entire performance contract, no matter how many times you tell them that you are not Latina. Having those say that it must be why you are so pretty that you are not fully Black. Or suggesting that you should work with someone who looks like you. or that you should embrace who you really are and wear your hair naturally. Being made to feel that you constantly underperformed in your job as an excuse to treat you unfairly. Others seeing you being treated unequally due to race but staying confused about the root of the treatment. Having to constantly seek out special places for personal hygiene in places not created for you, and being questioned about it by others like you are an alien life form. Being belittled for what you know as an adult, with others consistently asking who taught you that. Going to make a negotiation with a non-black counterpart, only to return alone and be denied that same agreement. You don't get used to people saying that they saw your mother in the audience of your show and that she must be surprising you because one black woman has come to watch the show, and they assume that you must be related. I've looked out behind many curtains with a second hesitation, thinking maybe my mom did come, even though knowing deep down that this is surely not the case. Having your words be misinterpreted and misconstrued by others so that they can use them against you, knowing that you are already being perceived as the lesser of the two will work to their benefit. Being constantly gaslighted and being told that what you experienced didn't happen the way that you think that it did, creating continuous doubt and frustration within you about your day-to-day reality. Feeling exhausted by the year after year of the same behaviors, yet still continuing on because you love the work and because you know the importance of continuing to show up for black artists who will come after you in a hopefully better environment. Being told constantly that you should try to learn from others while being at the top of your field. Having your Americanness constantly questioned with, but where are you really from? Even while you maintain that you are simply American or even Black American. Others always wanting to know how much of your family was born in America, as if that validates your being American. And once it's revealed that you are Black, the subtle dismissal, and sometimes not so subtle dismissal, that you are not really American. Or when you are having fun helping your Black father pick out sunglasses that you think are stylish, but he reminds you that they might make him look threatening and are probably not the best idea. And those words don't mean what they mean to you many times until later in your life when you get older and you re-look at certain situations and circumstances, because you can finally match those phrases to the root cause, phrases that you've heard since you were little by other Black individuals. Because those comments are not new. And yes, some of them might be blanketed where you can say, oh, well, that's just circus performing in general, or that's about being a woman, or that's about a different group that's consistently exploited too, that's received that same treatment. And those things are also true. I have stood in many situations and watched others exploited for various different reasons and been just as outraged. But to not name a thing when it comes to racism against Black people all over the world is, in my eyes, ignorant. It doesn't take away anything from the other exploitations and racism done against others. And for other ethnic groups, we all know those same code words. We know those dog whistles. We know what those phrases mean. And it's because others in their lives that are our ethnicity, that are Black, have told us those same words
from their life experiences. And it's not until we experience it, sometimes firsthand and at a certain age, that we finally get it. It hits us at those moments of, oh, that's what they were talking about all those years. Oh, that's what they were consistently so burdened about. Oh, that's what they meant when I tried to explain those comments away, make them lighter than what they were, make those situations more about my personality inadequacies than about the underlying demonic, sad, sadistic reality of how those situations played out and for what reasons. But that's also the role of those in positions of power, to not name a thing, to continuously remind you and remind others that it is not about your color, that it's about something that you did on a personal level. They'll be the first to show you the example of another person that is black that did not have that same experience as you, even though they don't know that you have spoken to that person and compared notes, and that that person had very similar experiences. It just was spoken to differently, and they, for some reason that they actually don't even know, managed to do better than you in that situation, and were just slightly treated better, but received the same comments, felt the same exact feelings that you felt, even with words being used differently. Because again, people don't realize that when you're in such a small group and demographic of oppressed people, no matter how much you think that person is flourishing in those roles, in that career, and in that life, that you compare notes. It doesn't happen often, and maybe they're not in exactly the same sphere or environment as you, but it's similar. It's very similar in that you compare notes. The things that we don't say out loud, or that we know that if we do bring them up, that they'll be met with defensiveness, usually resistance, usually in, oh, but that doesn't really happen, or you're way too accomplished, or you can't really use that excuse, can you? Because you've done so well. Not knowing that you didn't get to do as well as you could have and should have. Not knowing that your opportunity was 50% of the length that it should have been, sometimes 30%. And that the experience within that situation was so discouraging and so brutal, with the day-to-day comments, with the constant defending of yourself, with the need to know that you have to be beyond perfect because your one mistake that you make in that role is going to be the thing that loses you that role, while you watch others freely make mistakes and have no sense of stress about it at all. They move through their situations and their contracts unburdened, thinking why you're taking your mistakes so seriously, not knowing that you know that that one mistake will be used against you in the end. These are not theories. These are not things that we make up in our minds. The oppression is too consistent. The words are too consistent. The treatment is too consistent. It's racism. To exist as being black in the world, anywhere in the world, is first met as lesser. And I've traveled all over the world. I've never seen any other ethnic group be met with the same level of immediate distaste and negativity as I have by someone saying or being acknowledged for their blackness.
These are all firsthand experiences that I have experienced and had since I was a young girl, starting out in acrobatic gymnastics and competing all over the world, and as a circus performer now for the past 16 years post my retirement from acrobatic gymnastics. These are all true. They've come from me, and I've experienced them not just once, but countless times. These are painful experiences, and it's taken a lot of self-care, support from family and friends, therapy, to maintain groundedness, to maintain a healthy sense of self, and to maintain a career and a lifestyle that many, many, many times over I have thought to leave and do something else. But I know that this is something that I was born to do. I know that this is my calling. It always has been. And I feel and I know that when you are the first person in any space, it's not an easy task. It's not an easy game. Even if it's only you that knows that or acknowledges that, because really no one's there to validate that experience for you. You have to maintain that experience of validating yourself against all other opinions, judgments, racist remarks, insinuations about who you are, or overt explanations of who people think you are in the world, and the continuous dismissals of your importance as an individual in the world beyond how people just see you as a black body, as a brown body. I'm looking forward to justice for the beautiful black souls that I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, because that is what they deserve. That is where we will start to heal and mend and grow as a country, as a world. We need to continue to acknowledge the suffering of black people all over the world, of black people suffering in America. We need to acknowledge that there needs to be reparations for black Americans, that a debt is to be paid for our suffering, starting from slavery, and that actual action needs to be taken to make amends for the systematic racism, for the ongoing killings of our black culture. It's painful. It's sad. I want to see it in my lifetime. I want my children to see it in their lifetimes, my grandchildren's lifetimes. We want to see real change, real justice. Until then, we continue on protesting, organizing, uniting as a full and united country together, because we are all American. This is our nation, and this is our world. We are black people in this world. We are one world. We are here to love one another, to support one another. We are here for just a short time, a very short time in space. We don't live forever. So with the time that we do have here, we need to make it count, but make it count with fairness, justice, respect, compassion, love, and nonviolence. This is your host, Shenea Stiletto. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Live Like an Acrobat. I look forward to having you tune in for the next episode of Live Like an Acrobat. And until then, please stay safe and stay healthy.